In this video, I'm really excited because I'm going to be sharing with you some insights from a real professional architectural photography job I've shot recently. I'm going to be talking to you about how I capture the images and how I take the raw image from something like this, and through some quick processing, I'm able to get back to the client a really nice professional result like this. If you're new to this channel, my goal is to help improve your photography and editing skills through sharing some of my hopefully valuable insights that I've learned along the way during my professional career. If that's something you're interested in, please go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so that you're notified when I release a new video. But in this one, you're here to hear about architectural photography and me sharing my workflow. So let's get into that. I'll talk about how and why I shoot the way that I do, and then we'll look at the actual editing of the architectural photos. So how I use Lightroom to quickly get the proofs back. And then when the architect lets me know exactly which images he'd like from the shoot, I then process them in Photoshop, and I'll share with you some of my thoughts behind how I do this. And then at the very end of the video, I'm going to talk to you about how I add what I call my secret sauce. It's the little bit of differentiation that elevates my imagery, hopefully above my competitors in the field. And I think that's really important nowadays, more than ever, in this world that we live in, where imagery is all around us. We're super saturated in often high quality imagery, and if you want to stand out from your competitors, you're going to need to find an edge. And I share with you a tool that I'm currently using and have been for a little while now, just to finish off my imagery and take it to that next level. So let's dive into it, guys. When I first get back from a shoot, I'm really excited just to see the imagery, see what I've got. I'm all excited and I can't wait to download it. So that's exactly what I do. I head in here to the studio and I get the photos downloading. Now, Lightroom has an import feature where you can pull your photos straight from your card, put a preset on at that point. I don't use that feature, and the reason is I like to do it manually and be sure that I'm actually backing up my imagery, not just to my computer, but to other devices as well. So my workflow goes something like this. I'll come back with my memory card that is going straight into a dingly dangly like this, also known as a card reader. That goes in there. I'm backing them up or downloading them straight to my C drive, and for my C drive I'm using an M.2 SSD, currently the fastest hard drives that you can use. And for me, that's really important because everything's moving as quickly as it can through this workflow. And I'm going to work on those photos from that drive until I'm fully finished and the client's picked everything and all the editing is done. At that point, I will then move them away to some secondary storage. I don't format the card. I keep all the imagery on the card until the final delivery is given to the architect. The reason for that is just absolutely covering myself. If anything happens to any of those images, I've got one more backup here. Another backup that I make is to another SSD, an external drive, and basically that is just one of these SSDs that I'm plugging into another card reader, USB 3 connection, and I'm literally just backing up that folder of, for me, NEF files, just my raw files straight from my camera. It is purely for peace of mind. They are then going into a safe and being locked away, and you might be thinking, well, this is crazy, or this backing up, that's just too much. But part of your professionalism is making sure that your client's images are 100% safe. So let's have a look at the project and see how I actually imported the imagery. I have a folder set up with a folder structure within it, which includes interior, exterior, rejects, details, and unsorted, and that is where my photos will first go, into the unsorted folder, and I will literally just paste those into there. From there, I will open up Lightroom, and I will use Lightroom's file, import photos and video, or just come down to this button and click import. And this section is key for getting things done quickly. What you want to do is actually have a develop setting applied during import. So I can come to my AT architecture presets and I will put import proof, full dynamic range. From there, the photos will then appear within my folder relating to the project and within unsorted. From there, I will group the photos into stacks and actually just move them into the relevant folders: details, exterior, interior, and if there's shots that I took as test imagery or a sequence that I'm just not happy with, that finds its way into this rejects folder here. Once I've done that, I can get rid of my unsorted just to clean things up slightly. When I want to get the architectural photos back to the architect as quickly as possible, I'm doing that in a form of proofing, basically sending an unfinished representation of the shot. It's going to be close enough that the architect can get a sense of what the finished image will be like, but it means I'm able to do that, show him what I captured without spending too much time, because after all, when you're doing a professional job, time is money. The old adage is true, so you want to get those photos turned around as quickly as possible. And there are three main things that I do in Lightroom to make that possible. The first one is what I talked about just previously, which is making sure you've got a preset applied upon import, something that's going to get your photos looking pretty good straight out of the gate. And the key to having that work successfully is to have that preset work on a universal level. And what I mean by that is it's not going to be perfect for every shot, but you want it to work for as many photos as you possibly can straight out of the gate. And my approach to that is increasing the dynamic range. When you're shooting architecture, often there'll be during interiors, you'll see the exterior, or if you're shooting a building itself, the sky might blow out, the foreground's very dark, but you want to be able to show all the detail so that the person who's actually viewing the image will actually get a sense of what is possible, what the final image can look like. So what I'm going to do now is just walk you through what I have set up on my preset, and then I'll talk you through the two other key ingredients to making your photos look really good, really quickly in Lightroom. Okay, the image that we see here in front of us is what I actually sent through as a proof to the architect. So there is still a lot of work that would need to be done to this particular photo to make it something that they'd want to put in their portfolio or enter into a competition, but it certainly gives the architect enough to visualize where we're headed with this photo. If you look at what the before of this image looks like, you can see that we've actually come a long way from that to this, but we've come a long way with just those three keys that I was talking about before that allow us to get there really quickly. So let me share with you exactly what that is. First of all, let me just talk to you very briefly about how I shoot. So as you can see here, we've got a bracketed set of 5 images, as in I'm shooting a base exposure, the first one. I shoot 2 that are darker, 2 stops under, 1 stop under, 1 stop brighter, and then 2 stops brighter. And that just gives me the flexibility when I get back in front of the computer and I'm putting my final shots together, that if I need pieces that need to be brighter or darker, I've got the resource material right there to use. When I shot this, we can see that I'm actually looking up towards the building. We're at pretty much head height, I would say, on a tripod, and I'm working very quickly because there was actually a news crew that was right there on the pavement, sidewalk for you Americans, and I kindly asked them just to move while I got this shot, and they were really gracious about it, but they also had their work to do, so I moved quickly to get this shot. I may have actually gone in and picked up some of these bigger leaves that are scattered around and things like that, cleaned it up just a little bit in camera, but I didn't have time. So that's all stuff that can be fixed later, but we don't need to worry about that for the proof, as you can see here. So this bracketed set of 5 images, what I would do is take the first of those images and the preset would be applied on import. So let me show you what that preset would do to it. So that's AT import proof full dynamic range. So if I come off of it and apply it, you can see that it's really making a big difference straight away. So let's see what changes that preset is actually making. And if you want to copy this preset, by all means use my settings. It's a really good starting point for architectural photography. So let's click it and see what it's doing. First of all, in the basic panel, we're applying a profile. The standard Adobe color one just doesn't cut it. So let's browse for something that's camera matching, and in my opinion, flat is a great one to work with for architectural work. If you go to something like landscape or vivid, it's really high contrast and we don't necessarily get the detail out of it that we want. So let's double click flat and that is applied. I'm going to leave my camera white balance as shot. Again, it's just one more thing to worry about if you start trying to tweak that at this point. Sure, for the finished image you might want to come in and change the color balance slightly, but we'll leave that exactly where it is. The contrast is going to be altered, but for now I just want to show you what we do with the highlights and the shadows. We bring down the highlights and we push up the shadows, and straight away we're getting more dynamic range, as in we're getting more information into that image, but that comes at a cost, and that cost is that it's losing contrast. So what I will do here is I'll actually boost that contrast up to around there, and now we're starting to see a little bit more of an interesting image with that contrast. So if we just reset that change we've made so far and then reapply it, we can see that we're now seeing all the details of the architecture. We can see that this has come at a cost though. We have not got any pure blacks, we've not got any pure whites, and it's looking very washed out. So the whites will need to be bumped up, and as soon as we do that, we're starting to see that the image starts to come alive again. We can bring the blacks down slightly, and then our contrast, we can reintroduce contrast. I believe on my import I have this quite high and probably don't have the blacks pulled down or the whites pushed up quite as far, something like that. I will also come into the Presence tab, and clarity is a really powerful tool. Let's throw it all the way to 100%. I like to actually push these sliders all the way so you see what's happening, and then just pull it back to a point where it's much more subtle and believable. We can have a little bit of dehaze, but not too much. We could add the texture slightly, and vibrance, I also like to increase that just slightly so that any colors that are present in the image are starting to come through again to help the architect and whoever, or designer, whoever's looking at your photography, to actually visualize what the end result might be like. My preset also boosts the midpoint of the tone curve. That's just to give a little bit more life to the photo as well. So if we turn that panel off and then on, you can see that it's again just breathing a little bit more life into that photo. My presets leave the color, hue, saturation, all of that alone. Also the split toning is not touched. Detail, I do not sharpen at this point either. One of the main reasons I don't at this point is because any change you're making slows your system down, slows the processing down. Sharpening is one of those tools that is just adding another level of processing that we just don't need at the moment. The next panel, which is really important, is lens correction. This one is super important, and I really advise that you turn on remove chromatic aberration, and that will just take care of any of that fringing that you sometimes get, particularly in the corners of your frame. So if I turn that off, you'll see that we're getting a bit of magenta on the left hand side, green on the right. It's pretty nasty to look at, but as soon as we press remove chromatic aberration, it's taken care of. Lightroom's done a really good job. The next thing we want to do is also make sure that we've enabled profile corrections. So tick that. And because it's set to default, Lightroom's very clever at getting information from your file. It knows that I shot with a Nikon lens, the 16-35 vibration reduction lens. It knows that, and it's got a predefined profile which can actually correct the distortion. So if I turn that off and then back on, the original, you can see it's actually got a little bit of barrel distortion where it's kind of bulging the image, and that's taken care of. And it's also brightened the edges, which look like they've got a bit of vignetting around the edges, a bit of darkening. Lightroom is also taking care of that. Transform, effects and calibration at this point are all left alone. So basically what I've shown you here, and if I expand all of these, you can see what changes we've made. We've done a profile change to camera flat, and that's a camera matching profile. We've boosted the contrast, and we've dropped the highlights and boosted the shadows, which reduced contrast but added detail, and that's why we've bumped the contrast quite heavily up just to counteract that. The whites, bringing those back up from 0 all the way up there, basically brightened up our image and made it look a lot more appealing. As I move down to the Presence tab, sure, clarity is going to help us, particularly when we're visualizing architecture. Dehaze, yeah, let's put a little sprinkling of that, but not too much. And let's boost the vibrance so we can start to see those colors a little more. From there, it's just a case of just boosting the midtones on the tone curve and making sure that our lens correction is applied, which is simply ticking 2 boxes, and Lightroom is going to take care of the rest. So all of those changes that I literally just showed you, they're actually applied during import. You're going to apply preset during import. You've got it saved, it puts it on the photos, and so you're ready to start work at this point on your photos. So far it's taken you no time at all. So the next 2 steps are what take your photos to the next level and actually get them to a point that you're ready to send them through to your architect, your interior designer, or the real estate agent. Whoever you're sending these architectural photos through to, you need to have them kind of at this place. So the next 2 keys are: make sure your verticals are vertical. There is absolutely no excuse for wonky or non-parallel lines. There are some fantastic tools in Lightroom, and I'm going to show you my favorite one, which was introduced in later versions, but it's a brilliant tool to make sure that your photos are looking really at their best. And the other key is using local adjustments just to fine-tune things and deal with brightness and darkness issues that may be there in the photo. And I'll show you a way to do this really quickly. So let's dive in and look at the verticals first. So back in the old days, you probably would have been using these transform sliders, and we would have been getting hold of vertical, and we would have been tweaking that, and then we would have been using horizontal perhaps, and then we may have needed to rotate it slightly because we weren't quite dead centered. Then might have to come back and, oh geez, just does your head in. Don't like that way at all. The best way to get rid of that is just hold the Alt key or Option on a Mac and just hit Reset Transform. There we go. So we're back to where we started. I would recommend coming into the guided option. So by far the best tool around for doing this, in my opinion, is using this guided option, and that's going to allow you to put 4 guides on your image. Usually 2 is enough. Just drag down on the left hand side and match the angle that exists there, and do the same on the right hand side. You're going to click and drag and match the angle on the side of the building, let go, and pop. Magic, we have a straight building, and I love this feature. It's so cool. From here, if you want your image automatically cropped, we just click the constrain crop button, and then if you feel like the composition is off slightly, you can use the X and Y axis to actually reframe things ever so slightly. So we might want to do that, and that is part 2 of our 3-step process in getting the image ready. The next one is looking at localized adjustments. So we'll come up to the top, and the 2 that I like to use at this stage are the radial filter and the graduated filter. Graduated filter is great for skies. So if we bring a graduated filter down from top to bottom, you can hold down Shift to constrain it so it's not going off at a weird angle at all. Hold that Shift key, pull it down, and here, whatever your previous setting was is still there. So at the moment our temperature is being reduced, which actually works quite well for a blue sky. You can head the blue further into that blue, and you could drop the exposure slightly because skies are usually a bit brighter. You can do whatever you want really here. Just increase the shadows, maybe bring the brightness up slightly, and we could certainly increase the clarity because clouds like a little bit of clarity put in there. But the problem that you see here is it's applying over the building itself as well. So what we're going to use is the range mask and just use color, and we're going to grab the dropper here and just drag. So don't click, but actually drag over a section of the sky, and all of a sudden it's applied more to the sky than it is to the building. And at this point, yes, we are still getting a bit of color bleed over the building, but I'm not going to fret about it at this point. We can fix all of that later if the client decides to choose this photo, which incidentally in this case they did not. So you don't want to be spending too much time editing, refining, removing all those leaves from the foreground, retouching the real estate agent's sign off the fence at the front. What a waste of time that would be if you did all of that and then you're not actually being paid for that photo. You're not being paid by someone to license that photo. A complete waste. So keep it super simple at this point. The next tool I'm going to use is just the radial filter, and I'm just going to bring something over the building itself. We're just going to reset that by double clicking on the temperature, and now if I want I can bring the exposure up to brighten the building just to bring our eye in closer there. Maybe we want to bring the blacks down so it's just a little more dramatic. perhaps a little more clarity through on the building, something like that. And then at that point, we can say we're done. So if I duplicate this image by making a virtual copy, create virtual copy, and we just reset that virtual copy, we'll be able to see side by side our original and our edited proof. So here's our original, here's our edited proof. And as I said, we've just gone through a 3-step process. One of them's automated. We've applied the import preset. The second thing is we've straightened the edges. And the third thing is we've just used localized adjustments, bringing down a bit more darkness and detail in the sky and then brightening the building itself. Super, super simple. To get all of my photos from that whole shoot to that point where I can send them through to the architect, it shouldn't take more than sort of half an hour, 45 minutes at the most. And you've got a really nice set, a nice clean set of images to send through and say, hey, which photos do you want? And just so you know, I'm not billing my client for a job saying, this job is $2,000 or whatever. My pricing structure works like this. I have a shoot fee, and that's $575 plus tax, and that gets me there to capture the project, to do what I'm showing you here, and then send those proofs through to the client. At that point, they own zero imagery, no photos whatsoever. That is my time, and that is covering myself. If they pull the pin for whatever reason, or they say, oh, we just want one photo, I'm covered in terms of my time and just going out for that shoot. From then, I'm charging $85 per image. So for example, if they choose 10 photos, that's another $850, and the shoot is somewhere around $1,700 plus tax. If they choose 20 images, that's $1,700 if my maths is right, plus the $575. So you can see it's a nice billing method which is scalable depending on what the client actually wants, and I feel that you're being fairly remunerated for the time that you're then putting into actually finishing those photos. And when I say finishing them, I mean getting them to a point where they're ready for that architect's portfolio, or for the architect to actually enter them into some kind of awards. On that note, let me show you just how I'm exporting these images as proofs so that the client can't just take the photos and go and use them. So I'm using a watermark, I'll show you that. And then beyond that, I'll show you Photoshop, how I actually just finesse the imagery. And the final thing is the secret sauce, just how I elevate my imagery just that one step further so that it's differentiated from the competition, and other people look at it and go, that's a really cool photo. So let's take a look at that. So once the photos are at this stage, I'll export them as proof. So what I'll do is I'll actually select the photos, right click and come to export. I will click export ... And from there, within my commercial exports, I actually have a proofing option. So if I come down to proof image 980 pics, that's going to create a relatively small file, but one that they can certainly still see. So here guys, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about my export process. I'll go into a lot more depth, but really it is a video all on its own. But this is super powerful. If you're using Mogrify 2, and I strongly suggest Google that, look into it and install that as a plugin, because that's going to allow you to do 3 really powerful things. One is we're going to put a border on the outside. That allows me to put a thin white border of 1 pixel around the image, and then a black border with a larger bottom border. The reason I do that is because I then use the text annotations, and I use file name as the text at the bottom of the photo, so that the client can easily reference the file name. So this is 09 Cranmer Square, so they can give me a list back where they're saying I want image 01, 04, 09, etc, etc. It's all there on the file name, but actually physically in front of them as well on the photo. It's actually printed on there. I'll show you that in a moment. But the other really powerful thing is to add a graphical watermark. I have mine saved as a PNG, and it just implies that over the top. The reason I've used a PNG, not a JPEG, is PNGs can have transparency, so my logo is 50% transparent. So the photo shows through, but my logo is still there, and you can even specify where it goes. So I'd hit export, choose where I want to export the photo to, and then Lightroom would just do the rest. So let me quickly show you what those proofs look like once they're exported. Let's jump into the proof photos folder. So here is that image that we were just working on before, and this is what it looks like. I was telling you that it has a watermark over the top, so the client can't really go and use that without you getting a lot of credit, and honestly they're not going to. They're really not going to use this image like that with your logo over the top of it. But here underneath, this is really useful. It has photo reference 09 and then the name of the photo. So I just say to my clients, please give me a list referencing the numeric prefix of the file name. So for example, and I'll just make it super simple, 09, 12, 15, etc. And that makes it straightforward enough that they can go, oh yeah, number 14, yes, I like that. It's written here on the actual file itself, but it's also written here directly on the photo, which is great. Once your architect sends you back that list, the first thing you do, or the first thing I do, is I count how many photos they want, because each one of those photos is dollar signs in the bank, right? So I count them up and I go, ooh, there's a $2,000 project I've just shot. Great. The next thing I do is I start my final edit on those photos. And that might be that I'm now using not just that one photo that we sent through as a proof, but I might be compositing elements from the different set. So if I've done a bracketed set of exposures, going through from dark to bright, there might be different parts of each photo that I want to combine. And I'll either do this with HDR software, and I'm using Aurora 19 for doing that, and it does a really great job really easily, which I really like. And I can use that as a layer within Photoshop, and then I can either use it as it is, or if I just want to take parts of that HDR image into problematic areas like deep shadows and things, I can do that. Or I use luminance blending within Photoshop. What I'll do now is I'll just really quickly show you one photograph, show you my layers palette, and I'll talk you through what I've done in Photoshop to get that photo to a really close point to delivery. And to be honest, it's what most professional photographers would probably be happy to deliver. And then I'm going to show you one more thing, which is kind of like the master chef who just puts in those secret ingredients, just to take their dish to that exceptional level. It's the same kind of thing with the photo editing. There's just one more tool that I like to use that just adds that finishing touch, that je ne sais quoi. So I'll show you that shortly, but let's jump into Photoshop. Here we go, guys. This is one of the interior shots from that project that we were just looking at. So if we hold down the Alt key and click on the eyeball here in Photoshop, we can see what I imported, which is not too dissimilar from the finished shot. So finished shot, so before and after, really not too much in it, but we've brightened up some of the shadow areas. We've brought in a little bit of blue for the sky out there, not too much, but we've gone from a pure white to a little hint of blue. And I've also corrected the distortion that we were getting on this lampshade here. See how elongated and stretched out that is? We just fixed that up. So in terms of editing, I initially imported a base layer. I've then imported another layer which is brighter, and that's just correcting some of those areas that were just falling into a little bit of dark shadow there, and even bits where I've got a little bit of darkness on the wall here that I think was like a kind of shadow from maybe a light or lamp in the corner there. We're just correcting those kind of things as well, but nothing too difficult. If I show you the mask that I was using, it's pretty gnarly, but it did the job. I'm then doing the same for the highlights. You can see here I'm just bringing the highlights in. As I said before, I could have used HDR software, Aurora 19. If HDR is your thing, guys, I'll put a link in the description below. Again, fantastic bit of software, real time saver. But I actually used luminance masking for this. So if I show you my mask here, it's a pretty detailed mask, super easy to create though. Just you go image, apply image when you're on the mask layer, and that will actually create a mask based on luminance. And then where those white parts are, we're actually revealing this darker image below, which actually has all the highlight detail. So the blue sky, a little bit of detail here in the wood. So without that, it's so subtle, but without that we can't see the wood there, or it's completely blown out. So we're just bringing that back. And then if we look at the final thing I did here, which was literally I just cleaned up this lampshade up at the top here because it was getting a little distorted. It's affected by exactly the same distortion that everything else is in the frame, but you don't notice the other things quite as much. So at this point you might think, I'm done, I'm happy with that image. And I am happy with it, but I just think I can take it to the next level. So now I'm going to show you another tool that I use just to take things a little further. And this tool is Luminar, and you can use it in several different ways. The new version, which is currently 4.1, you can do sky replacement, which I've used in a lot of my architectural projects. That's super handy. I didn't use it in this particular project, but one thing I did use is a preset that I've created, and you can do the same. It's really easy, and it's using AI within Luminar 4 just to finish off your image. So let me show you that, because you can do it to one image, or what I like to do in this case is when you've got 12 images that I'm working on here, I can apply it to all as a preset. I'll just synchronize it between those, and the finished photos will all have that applied, and they look great. Let's have a look. So for the editing of all of the images, I would load Luminar as a standalone program and do it through there. But for the sake of demonstrating what we're doing, I'm going to use it as a plugin. So if you get this piece of software, what you can do is use it as a plugin or as a standalone editor. So if you're interested in it as a photo editor on its own, it's really inexpensive, and unlike Lightroom and Photoshop, it's not a recurring subscription. You pay once and it's yours, which is great. And if you are interested in it, I have a code that you can use, which is @Sky10. Skylum, who make the software, gave me that code, and that is yours to use as well if you would like. Saves you $10 at checkout, unless they've already got some other promotion on, and then, you know, it's like, don't be greedy, just have the promotion that's on. But in any case, go for gold and use that. So to use Luminar on this image as a filter, what we're going to do is actually create a stamp visible layer, and that's just saying everything that we can see at the moment, put that onto one layer. And that is the monster shortcut Control Shift Alt and E, or Control Shift Option E. And then bam, did you see up here? We have a whole new layer which has just been created. We then come over to Filter, and if Luminar is installed, you will find under Skylum Software, Luminar 4. It will load up for you. And now your image is yours to work on within Luminar, and when you're finished, you can just apply that look. Ultimately, what I'm going to do is create a preset here, a little like I did in Lightroom, and just apply it to all of my images. And once you've done it once, you can use it on every photo you ever do. So let's make this full screen, and I'll show you some of the things that I like to do. A couple of great options are to use the artificial intelligence within Luminar. So you do AI enhance, and I'm just going to push it all the way to the right, which is going to overbake things, but I'm just showing you what happens here. So AI accent, if I turn it off and on, you can see that it's adding contrast, adding color, just generally enhancing things. But I find that normally if you go to the fullest extent just with any filter, it's too much. So let's maybe pop that somewhere around 25. AI structure, that's a little like clarity in Lightroom, except it's a little more intelligent, being AI. So again, if we go all the way to the right, you'll know if you use Lightroom that if you go to 100% in clarity, your image just looks like absolute. And that's kind of the same here. You know, it's too much at 100%, but I certainly want a little bit of this because it's just adding a little bit more structure, hence the name. You've also got a details enhancer that you can use here, and I don't like to do too much of this, but if I push it all the way up, you can see what's happening, and that's very similar to Lightroom's texture that's been added, but I just feel it's done in a little bit more refined way. And so the large, medium and small details, I'll just boost them up a little bit. I might then sharpen my image, so it's the final output of this image, and I'm just going to sharpen it. Because of all the changes we've made along the way, we've probably introduced a little bit more noise in the image, so I will normally denoise this slightly as well. And if you want to, you can use a vignette, but I normally steer clear of vignettes, particularly in architectural photography. But let's say you wanted to put in a little bit of vignette just to focus people's attention more towards the center of the frame, you can do that. So just through these few changes, and you can see which changes we've made because they're highlighted white, we can look at our before and our after, and things just really start to pop nicely. So before and after. Before and after. I love that. And the great thing about using this particular tool is because a lot of it is AI driven, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about an interior, an exterior, something that has sky, something that doesn't have sky. The software is smart enough to make those contrast adjustments, color adjustments, and all of that stuff, bearing in mind what scene it's actually looking at. So you can create this preset and it doesn't have to be altered image to image. It can just be applied. If you like the look, apply it to the whole lot. So now I'm just going to show you a couple more things that I like to add. And once I've done that, you just save this as a preset and it's yours to apply to all of your images, which is great. So we've been in what they call the Essentials tab, but we can now come to the Creative tab here, click that, and you get a whole different set of tools. These are really powerful in their own right, particularly the AI sky replacement. That is insanely useful. Sun rays I've used in a lot of like my landscape work, but there's a couple of things here we could look at for architecture. Dramatic is quite good. Too much again on the right, but always push things too far and then you can see where you're headed and you go, okay, that's what it's doing, that's the effect. Do I want that effect or not? Or do I want maybe 2-3% of that, just something, just a little tickling in amount? Let's go 4%, why not? Mystical, I quite like this because it gives your imagery a dreamy, hazy kind of look. It's almost like that 80s glamour glow look, but which most people would never dream of using for an architectural image. But I like to actually just put a little bit in, and that's what I'm talking about when I say the secret sauce. This is your recipe for your look. And talking of recipes and looks, this is one of my absolute favorite things. You can now apply a LUT. And if you don't know what a LUT is, it's a look-up table. It comes from the movie industry, and it's basically color grading that's put over your photo. And Lightroom, in my opinion, has it all back to front. They apply the LUT, which they've only recently really introduced in the grand scheme of Lightroom, but they put it at the front end. Now, I prefer on the front end using a camera matching profile so that any editing you're making is relevant to your sensor, your camera. You can get the purest colors, the purest contrast, all of that good stuff. And then at the end of that process, I think you should be able to color grade your image. And that's where I think Lightroom's kind of got it flipped the wrong way. Luminar allows you to put a color grade, a color look after the fact that you've done all your processing, and I really like that. So let's choose ourselves a LUT, just as an example. I don't normally utilize this in terms of architectural photography for a client, but if I'm posting something to Instagram, I might be doing this. So if I flick through these, you can see that it's actually applying different color grades. So for example, we might like to use this wooden color grade. So let's click it. Currently we're at 30%. If we cranked it all the way to 100, you can see exactly what it's doing to the image. I certainly wouldn't recommend giving this as a professional image to a client like this, but you may want to have just maybe say 16% of this as your secret ingredient for your particular style. And once we're done with that, we can just have a look at our before and our after. And we can see that we've certainly made a difference to this image. This is our before, this is our after. We've got more style to it, we've got a bit more pop, and the photograph is just a lot more visually interesting. And if we like what we've done here, we can save this new look and we can apply that to every single photo. So let's do that. AT Archi Demo. And now that becomes accessible to us. Okay, so I've opened up Luminar as a standalone photo editing program. The last project that I was working on is visible here. So I was here photographing this shearer's shed, which is a really nice fancy building in the middle of nowhere in New Zealand. But unfortunately, we had a really boring, dull day. So I actually used Luminar to actually change the sky. So it was no masking. From my part, it was all driven by AI. So as you can see there, the difference with and without, I really feel like it enhanced that image for me. The sun came out later here. Well, it was kind of cloudy, but came out, but I was able to change the sky for something a bit more dramatic. I was with the client on site just for 2 hours. It was we're in, we do the shoot, we're out. So while we're on site, this is probably 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that. It was really drab, grey and overcast. I was really disappointed by that, but I sent the drone up. The client wanted an evening shot. Obviously we're not able to get that there and then, but with a little bit of AI help, there we have an evening shot. That was all done just using Luminar's sky replacement tool, which was cool. But anyway, what I want to show you with this project at the moment is how we are going to apply that preset we were just working on. So let's add a folder with images. So here I have my JPEGs that were sent straight out from Photoshop, and I'm going to just click OK, and they will be loaded into Luminar. And as you can see, these are the finished shots that were chosen by the client. So it's a nice selection of images, but I just think that we can take them that little bit further with that preset that we made before. So you'll remember that we actually worked on this particular image with the preset, which was Archi Demo. So if I click that, that's going to apply the Archi Demo preset, and we can see our before and after. And if that is what we like, we can then apply that to all of those. I also have a very similar one that I worked on earlier called Archi Finisher, and it's just a little bit more subtle, but if I turn it off and on, it's just that little subtle pop. I'm using exactly the same tools that I showed you before, the AI accent filter, the structure, but just at a slightly lesser amount. And that's what I'm going to apply to all of these photos. So the easy way to do that is, this is our photo that's selected. We're going to shift click on the top and the bottom just to make sure they're all selected. We're going to right click, adjustments, and sync adjustments. And now, just like that, all of these photos will have had that same look applied to them. So if I click on this one here, which is a front-on view of the property, that loads up and we're able to see a before and after, and it's a really subtle change, but it's nice. The image just really kind of pops now. So before and after, I love that. So now all we need to do is just export these photos. We can go right click, export, send them to the appropriate folder, and we're done. Well guys, I really hope this video has been useful to you. Just in review really quickly, we looked at a way to proof our photos back to our client really quickly, and that involved having a good solid preset set up in Lightroom that we can apply to our architecture on import. From there, we're then straightening the photos and using local adjustments just to make them look pretty good, pretty close, and we export them as proofs. The client then comes back to us with a nice big list, hopefully, and they're the ones that we're going to edit. We're then going to use potentially our bracketed photos, or maybe even just one's enough, but we're going to take it into Photoshop just to finesse things, just finish things off to a finer degree. If there's things like leaves in the way, scuffs on the building, whatever, that can all be taken care of using like the healing brush, for example, in Photoshop. Once those images are saved out, what I like to do is just add my secret sauce, just that little bit of finishing, again, just to elevate your work to the next level so you really stand out with your architectural photography. The process of just taking the photos to the next level with a preset in Luminar, you can actually do that for any genre of photography. I've used that for a set of landscape images, for example, but there's no reason why you couldn't create your own look for wedding photography, for example. You could use that nice mystical filter or whatever, things like that, and then just really enhance your wedding photography and say apply to all, export those photos, and you've got a whole really nice set ready to give to the client. So let's take a look at where we came from with these photos, where we finished up, and don't forget, if you want to get hold of a copy of Luminar, which I think is really good value, because as I said, I sell each photo for $85, and I think that piece of software is not too much more than that. Plus you can use a discount code of @Sky10, ATSky10, to save a little more. I'll leave you with the transformation of the photos, and guys, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.